Tonight, this episode of It's Your Call is one of our continuing series dedicated to facing the mortgage crisis, brought to you with the support of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Good evening. I'm your host, Roger Bowman. First, I want to make it clear that not all modification companies and advisors are committing fraudulent practices. Tonight's show is all about loan modification fraud and what you can do to find a reliable loan modification service. Our guests this evening are Larry Roberts, lead Deputy District Attorney of Real Estate Fraud in San Bernardino, California. Next, we have Jennifer Brennan, attorney for the Federal Trade Commission in Los Angeles. And via the telephone tonight, we have a call-in expert, Pastor Herrera Jr., Director of the Department of Consumer Affairs in Los Angeles. Thank you for joining us this evening. I invite you to call with your questions of our guests. The toll-free number is 866-367-5827. Thank you very much. Well, I fumbled it. Larry, tell me what your title is. What is your job?
I lead the Real Estate Fraud Investigation and Prosecution Unit in the San Bernardino County District Attorney's Office. That's what I do.
Okay, what generally are the types of cases that you take, and you lead the group that prosecute those cases, is that correct?
Investigate and prosecute. We have 6 investigators and 2 prosecutors and a smaller support staff. What we do is investigate fraudulent real estate transactions that, generally speaking, involve the recordation of documents in our county recorder's office.
Great. And recordation being?
Taking a document down to the recorder and say, would you record this for me, please? A transfer of title, a notice of default, a foreclosure, a pending sale, things of that sort.
Now, how would that be fraudulent?
How would what be fraudulent?
How would people give a scam in the recordation process?
The deed may be, and often, well, I'm going to say oftentimes are, in the cases that we investigate, will either have a forged signature on it, or will bear a forged notary, or will be altered in some way, in such a way as to fraudulently affect the title to the property that is affected by the deed or the deed of trust or interspousal transfer deeds, that sort of thing.
And are you seeing a surge in other kinds of real estate fraud with the foreclosure crisis that we've seen over the past year?
Oh, unquestionably. Absolutely unquestionably.
Okay, and Jennifer, tell us about what you do.
I'm an attorney with the Federal Trade Commission in the Western region here in Los Angeles. And we are headquartered in Washington, D.C., of course, because we're a federal agency. What I do as an attorney in my office is I litigate cases in federal district court against companies that are basically committing fraud or unfair or deceptive acts or practices.
What generally is the run-of-the-mill type of deceptive practice that you run into?
Well, the FTC's jurisdiction is very broad, and we cover cases from fraudulent telemarketing to work-at-home scams, to travel scams, to fair credit reporting type scams. But we're also recently, of course, focusing on problems in the area of mortgage loan modification scams.
Good. I'm glad to hear the FTC is on it. And Pastor, I understand you're with us. Tell us a little bit about what you do.
Well, good evening. Thank you for the invitation. I'm the director for the Los Angeles County Department of Consumer Affairs that serves approximately 700,000 consumers annually, not only providing information, counseling them on different consumer fraud and complaint issues. Also, we do investigations, we do mediations, and we also have a special investigations unit that works with the local prosecutory agencies and some of the federal agencies like the FTC in bringing justice to the marketplace through the court system. We have different divisions. We have, of course, our consumer fraud division that deals with landlord-tenant issues, used car dealerships, retail sales, credit issues. We have an identity theft unit that deals, of course, with identity theft, which is also a major issue not only in our county and our state, but also throughout the country. And we have a small claims court advisor program, an elder abuse unit that deals with frauds and abuse, financial abuse that are suffered by seniors. And we also have a very important public information outreach division that we go out and speak because we do think that we need to be proactive in educating consumers, tenants, homeowners, particularly now in today's environment where there's such a spike in foreclosure scams.
Pastor, I want to mention that on your website, I noticed the Department of Consumer Affairs has a substantial amount of information on mortgage fraud and loan scams and loan renegotiation scams. So it seems like your department has been very aggressive in trying to educate the consumers about how to avoid fraud as they go through this foreclosure process.
Absolutely, because we think that there is a lot of lack of information and a lot of misinformation. And we feel that it's important so that consumers, homeowners, really get information that is hopefully accurate, and we're very proud of that, and information that they can understand. Because it is, particularly real estate, is a very complex, very intimidating process, which I think it's important for the homeowners and even tenants to get the best information and information that they can understand.
So, Pastor, I actually just want to take a moment and say thank you. We have learned a lot at kvcr.org for the mortgage crisis from your organization and from your site because, as you say, you do make it accessible, you do make it understandable. So,
thank you very much, and we encourage the audience here to really log on and if they do have a question, of course, they can maybe hopefully find their answer on the website. If not, they can also email us a question, even though they may not live in LA County, but we will try to answer it.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to go out and, Larry, talk a little bit about what are the types of real estate transaction fraud or credit protection transaction fraud that have to do with the mortgage crisis.
That's hard. You really threw me. Well, let's do it this way. Today's hot button issue is mortgage modification fraud, and in law enforcement, it just seems to me that there's a perception that anybody who is charging a fee for representing somebody modifying a loan is somehow cheating the individual, and there may be those that are doing that. The focus the current focus on law enforcement is in that area. And I think that begins to answer your question. We in the District Attorney's Office are spending more time investigating cases that originated 2 and 3 and 4 years ago and are just now coming to our attention and getting to the point where we can either investigate or prosecuting them. And mortgage modification, fraudulent or otherwise, are current. And unfortunately, the District Attorney's Office acts behind the curve, so to speak. And we're not the most up-to-date agency to deal with that or express an opinion about it. Am I making sense?
Absolutely. But I know that that's the way it always is. For instance, in 2001, when the tech bubble collapsed, and then we discovered that the same large consulting entities that were also the large accountancies, they had the half that was recommending people buy stock and the other half that was charging those same companies for their consulting services millions and millions of dollars. So a lot of them were prosecuted ultimately, but that obviously happens when the news cycle has turned its attention to something else. It happens 2 or 3 years later. And no different here with the collapse and now the investigation to Countrywide. And so I would anticipate that your investigation of loan modification fraud companies is going to be behind the curve. So what I think I'm hearing from you, correct me if I'm wrong, because this is a kind of a salient point for our viewers, is it still has to be a little bit buyer beware. They have to use their senses. They have to do some homework themselves. You can't expect that as soon as somebody makes a representation on the internet or in an envelope that you open, that they're legit, because if they weren't, you guys would already be on them. That's not a fair assumption to make.
Well, it is a fair assumption to make in this sense. Let's back up a second. Mortgage modification fraud, real estate fraud. The common denominator there is the term fraud. What is fraud? Fraud is, by definition, a lie. my first question when somebody comes to me and says, I've been cheated, I'm the victim of a fraud, is, where's the lie? Tell me what it was that was said to you that is false. That is the lie that you relied on. It's not easy to find that often. I made a bad deal, or this thing went upside down on me. That's life. It's not always a fraud. If there's a lie in it, then maybe it is a fraud. So I ask that question, and if one looks at mortgage modification companies who are charging a fee to represent somebody in trying to renegotiate their loan for their loan on their home, for example, is there a lie involved? If the answer is yes, then I think we take the next step and look deeper into it and seeing if we can prove the lie and if it's criminal. And if it is, then we get involved.
One of the gray areas that comes to mind immediately then are these companies that offer to help you renegotiate. They take an upfront donation, they often characterize it, and then they don't do anything, or they do very little on your behalf. That's disproportionate to their fee, and it's harmful to the consumer having lost the money, but it's not necessarily a lie. Is that fair to say?
That's fair to say. That is fair to say. If that is a pattern of conduct, if, for example, that company is, and Jennifer can probably jump in here and answer this as well or better than I, if that pattern of conduct is repetitive, they take a big fee, they do essentially nothing, that is tantamount to a lie. What they're really saying is, we're going to do our very best to try to get your loan modified. How do you know that they're not actually trying their very best? What's false about the statement, I'm doing my very best? It might be, but on its face, it probably isn't.
Here's the problem,
It's just a bad deal.
The problem is they're not saying we're going to do our very best. They're saying we guarantee we can stop the foreclosure. We have special relationships with lenders that we can use to your advantage. We will call your lender immediately. We will stop your foreclosure tomorrow. It doesn't matter if you have a sale date, trustee sale date. We'll take your money and we will do something. And then if they don't follow up on those kinds of concrete promises, then that's a problem. And that could be deception and something that we would be very interested in going after as the Federal Trade Commission.
And it would be a lie, too.
It would be a lie.
The word guarantee in the colloquial form, the form everybody takes it on its face value, is that they will produce the result. But what it actually means is you get some form of redress if they don't produce the result. So very often the guarantee is that they will refund your money. And then I believe some of the consumers are saying that nothing happens if they don't get their money back.
Or there's fine print that's in this contract that is completely unreadable that disclaims away this money-back guarantee that supposedly exists. That's a problem we've seen as well.
Roger, this is Pastor.
Yeah, Pastor.
One of the big problems is many of these deceptive perpetrators and scammers, they're fly-by-nights. They're here today and they're gone tomorrow. And this is a real big problem, not only for us that we're trying to mediate and investigate the problem, but for the prosecutors that, they're gone. You can't trace their assets, and really the homeowner is out in the street, literally.
Okay, so another problem that I've seen, and Jennifer, I want you to see if you can answer this, is the mechanism by which they try to gain the consumer's trust. What kind of symbols and words and other things are they using to make you think that they're secure?
Well, we at the Federal Trade Commission have brought several cases where against companies that have borrowed names or have used names that suggest an affiliation with the federal government or with the Hope for Homeowners program, the Legitimate program, or with HUD. The names themselves suggesting that they're somehow a legitimate government-affiliated entity, which is in fact not the case. We've had a case that we filed just this past year, I think about a year ago, where the company was sending postcards that had a little logo that kind of looked like maybe an official government logo, but then in tiny, 4-point font or something on the bottom of the postcard, it said, "We're not affiliated with the government in any way." I participate in a Southern California foreclosure fraud task force, actually, of local, state, and government agencies, and federal government agencies. And we've been sharing information over the past 2 years, actually almost 3 years. And through that one of our meetings, I heard that one of the newer iterations of this sort of impersonation fraud is people who are pretending to be calling from your lender, or who are forging letterhead from different lenders and sending letters out to homeowners, impersonating the lenders basically and offering them services when in fact they're not actually affiliated with the consumer's lender.
Okay, so my immediate reaction to that is somebody could read the fine print, get out a magnifying glass and look for that 4-point font and find the one entity that said they're not really affiliated with the government, difficult as that may be. But if they're impersonating the lender, who else are you going to trust? How do you know that it didn't come from the lender? You get documents all the time.
You would have to call your lender, call the number that you would have if you have a mortgage statement, call the number there and ask for if you're in a situation as a borrower where you might be in distress, you would call and ask for the loss mitigation department and then find out, ask about maybe if there's a name on the letter, a particular person's name, or if there's some kind of reference, or if the phone number in the letter, presumably there would be some contact information, is actually in fact affiliated with your lender. But you're right. I mean, it would be very difficult for a consumer to even know that that's a scam. Okay, and as I expect, we have calls, and I'm going to go to Carrie in San Bernardino. You've been waiting already, so thank you for your patience. You're on the air. What's your question? And Carrie, are you with us?
I'm looking at your show as we speak. Hello?
Yes, you're on the air. And go ahead and listen into your phone.
This question is for the panel. I would like to know how can you
and for all of our callers and Carrie
detect your loan modification if it's a fraud or not.
How do you detect? How do you determine? What are the earmarks of a fraudulent solicitation?
Well, some of the things I just mentioned, of course, if there's a look for the fine print, there may often be fine print in it. If you get a solicitation in the mail, you would want to look for any fine print, any disclaimers that may be placed sort of in the bottom or on the back side of the page to suggest that maybe the company is a for-profit entity as opposed to a non-profit or a government-affiliated entity.
Now, is that bad? So they're for-profit.
Well, it depends. It could be bad if they are using if they're using a name like National Foreclosure Relief, an entity that the Federal Trade Commission sued last year, or Federal Loan Modification, an entity that the Federal Trade Commission sued this year. These are potentially very problematic if it's going to cause consumers to be confused about who's providing the services. And even if there's fine print, that doesn't necessarily let them get away with it. You can't disclaim away in tiny font on a piece of paper a statement that's deceptive.
So what I'm hearing...
Roger, this is Pastor.
Go ahead, Pastor.
There's a couple of things that I think also, and Jennifer is absolutely right in what she says, but some of the things that we see here is and you could really tell, one is high-pressure tactics. If they are just insistent that you sign today because they're the best, they're guaranteeing the moon to you, you better be careful, because that is definitely a sign that this is fraudulent. Another one is if they're asking you to make payments to them and not to your mortgage company. That is definitely a big red flag. And one very serious one is when you find out that they've transferred title from your property to them. That definitely is a red flag. And also when you call them and they don't return your calls or return your emails, or maybe they're no longer in the office that they took you to sign those documents.
But
those
Pastor,
are definitely red flags.
Okay, in that case, Pastor, how does somebody know ahead of time, before they shell out the money, that this company is likely fraudulent and likely to transfer title on them?
Well, I think we did mention that, and I think you mentioned, Roger, that we do need to do some homework. We do need to investigate these companies, and I think all of us agree that probably the first place they should start is maybe go to first a HUD-approved counseling agency, and if they think that doesn't work and they want to pay, well, then they have to do some research. They have to contact the Better Business Bureau, contact the Department of Real Estate, the State Department of Real Estate contact the FTC, contact us to see if, in fact, there are any complaints against this company, and really try to maybe get personal referrals of people that they know that may have gone to a loan modification facilitator to assist them with that loan modification. It's not an easy process, believe me. And, the consumer really has to be on the defensive here. They have to be very careful. And another thing I think is very important, do not give them any money up front. Only attorneys can ask for money up front if, in fact, they have an agreement, a retainer agreement that has been signed. So if they want the money all up front, then that's definitely a big sign.
So money up front is probably not going to represent a legitimate company that is going to charge you unless it's a retainer law firm. And the other thing you mentioned is if they want you to make payments to them. I think what you were referring to, Pastor, clarify it for us, is if they want you to make the mortgage payments to them in lieu of to the bank.
Absolutely. That's exactly what I mean.
Okay. And Jennifer, what I surmised out of what I gathered out of your description, if there is a legitimate for-profit company that's going to help you, take you farther than the HUD counselor's advising aspect for free, so you find a mediator or somebody that's for-profit, if they are trying desperately to look like they're affiliated with government, that's a bad sign.
Oh, definitely. I would definitely. Why would a company need to impersonate the government? I mean, if they were legitimate, I just think that's got to be a big red flag for anybody.
Or they say they are authorized by the Making Home Affordable bill to represent
right.
the government.
I don't think that's going to be an accurate statement on anybody's part. I mean, there are approved credit counseling agencies out there that you can find if you go to the HUD.gov website, you can find an approved credit counselor in your area anywhere in the U.S. And those are companies that are legitimate nonprofit entities that will help consumers who are in financial distress in any situation, including being behind or underwater on your mortgage.
Okay.
But
I'm going to jump to another
caller.
caller.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so we're going to go out to Crestline. Leonard, you're on the air. It's your call. What's your question?
Yes, my
Leonard?
question is, the property that I am renting is in foreclosure, and I'm not being, sorry for the motorcycle, I am not being charged any rent.
You're not being charged rent.
No.
That's unusual. Okay, so your question is, how long will that last in your favor?
I really don't know.
Okay, so how about they paint a likely outcome for you? Can you do that? I know that isn't.
I've already gone 1 month.
That's a tough one. That's a tough one for us. I mean, I've heard of problems in this area of basically homes being taken or apartments being taken out from under people because they get foreclosed on because the owner of the property falls behind on the payments, and then the lenders are foreclosing and getting the tenants out. But I think the tenants do have rights. I mean, I don't think that it's just you're out the door. I mean, but honestly, I'm not sure.
Not your area. Okay,
No.
so.
Well, Roger, this is Pastor.
Yes, Pastor.
One of the things that I think the gentleman should do is save the money, not spend the money that he usually pays for rent, just in case the bank representative, and he'll need to confirm who the bank representative is, because someone could come to his door and say, I'm the bank representative, give me the money. I think he needs to have some type of proof that whoever comes to the door to pick up the rent is from the bank, and he needs to call or the bank to verify that. Another way is if in fact the property is in foreclosure, there has to have been a notice of default filed, and that provides a lot of information. It provides who the financial institution is and a lot of other information, and he might have received a copy of that, and if he didn't, he could go to the Register Recorder's office and obtain a copy, I think for a fee, or maybe he might be able to see that document to see who exactly is the mortgage company or the trustee that may be handling that property at that particular point in time.
Now, I will let our caller know that although you in particular, our guest this week, deal with the fraud aspect, we had last week two attorneys that deal with tenants' rights, and they were talking precisely about this thing, and they told us, and you can see it on the website, it's on YouTube, that program is, and their advice, but tenants have an obligation to continue paying the rent because they are occupying a unit. The unit is still technically owned by the person to whom holds the title or is the owner of the property, and they still need to pay their rent. If they think somebody is going to fraudulently take their money, they can put it in kind of an escrow, but they have to be able to show that they are making those regular payments. Otherwise, they lose those very rights that, Jennifer, you were talking about. And we were informed last week that they do have some rights, that, in fact, the new owners, after a trustee sale, cannot just evict them.
That's correct. They cannot. And we have on our website, the LA County Department of Consumer Affairs, we do have a section there for renters in foreclosure that this gentleman may want to just go to our website, which is dca.lacounty.gov.
Okay, so let me go out to another caller. Let's go to Upland, and I'm going to call it Antoinette. Is it Antoinette? You're on the air.
Yes. It's
Hi,
not
Antoinette.
a it, it's a she, but hello.
Hi, what's your question?
Okay, it's not. First of all, the comment is, someone made a comment that do not deal with loan modification companies who do not answer your calls or send you emails. I'm dealing with a major company, J.P. Morgan Chase, which took over WAMU. They don't return calls or emails, and they do so many fraudulent things. It's unbelievable. I've been dealing with them for almost 9 months now, on my own. Okay?
I understand.
So the statement is wrong. Also, I want to know, my question is,
Yep.
I don't know. It's just a mess.
Okay, let's talk about that a little bit. Pastor mentioned that if the company is not returning your calls and not returning your emails, they're probably fraudulent. It's likely that J.P. Morgan Chase is not fraudulent, but they don't, in all cases, we have heard, allegedly return calls or emails either. What's the distinction?
Well, one of the things is that, financial institutions are overwhelmed. We were talking to one of the major banks a couple of weeks ago concerning this issue, and they are dealing with over 300,000 potential loan modification cases at this point in time, and growing. So, I didn't want to lead you to believe that everyone that doesn't return a call or doesn't answer email is fraudulent. No, I believe that your major players here, your major financial institutions, they are overwhelmed, but you have to be insistent, and I would suggest that this person, this homeowner, maybe go to a HUD-approved certified counselor, and maybe through their network they can get information concerning their loan modification and where they're at, because they are overwhelmed. But I think my comment was really referring maybe to a smaller financial institution that that maybe doesn't have is not recognized as a major player in the financial.
I agree that if you've just turned over $1,500 is the number I commonly hear in donation to a renegotiation company, they should return your calls and emails because they're there and you're engaging them ostensibly because your banks are not responding to you. So I understand your point perfectly, Pastor. Let me throw something out, though, and I want any of you to answer this. And I understand banks are challenged. Banks are overwhelmed. But we believe they have deep enough pockets that they can find people to certainly get back in touch with those that are having difficulty paying those banks. It is ostensibly in the bank's best interest to maintain the communication. The viewers are hearing from us and other experts, stay in communication with your bank. What happens when the bank isn't in communication with you beyond the collection department? And here's what I'll throw out. Some of our viewers have said that they've applied for loan modifications directly with the bank, followed the bank's instructions, submitted the paperwork, and the banks have told them that it won't be reviewed until they bring their loan current. And as soon as they brought it current, they are told it's denied, they weren't anywhere close to the criteria, and that's information that would have been known at the moment the paperwork is submitted, but they dangled the possibility of a remodification or a renegotiation in order to bring the person current. And that's money that the person now being foreclosed on might have needed to put a first and last on a new apartment, or to get a bankruptcy attorney, or to hire somebody to work on their behalf. Isn't that a gray area of fraud?
I think that's a tough question because, I mean, you have a mortgage and it's a contract between the lender and the borrower. The borrower's agreed to pay a certain amount to the lender, and it's in the lender's interest to get as much of that contract back as the lender can. I mean, that's what they're in the business of doing, is lending money.
I agree. And if the lender says, you know what, you have a contractual obligation to pay me, so pay me, I understand that. Sorry for hitting my mic. But if they say instead that, gee, you're a candidate for a modification and you'll be able to save your home if only you bring the loan current, and once they do, oh, sorry, you're way outside of our criteria.
Well, I mean, it does sounds a little
Sounds despicable,
fishy.
doesn't it?
Now,
but I don't know if that's something that I certainly couldn't, because I don't have jurisdiction over the banks, unfortunately.
Right. Now, I'm not going to disparage all the banks, and I want to mention that J.P. Morgan Chase was mentioned here by our caller, and I threw out a challenge to banks. Our regular viewers in the Inland Empire in Los Angeles know this. I asked the banks to contact KVCR, step up, and be our guest and answer these questions. Chase is now working with us. Arrowhead has been working with us from the beginning. Some of them now are engaging us, and we hope to have them on our show soon. B of A has never returned my calls, so where are you, B of A? So, okay, let's take another call. I'm going to go out to Riverside. I'm going to go to Mr. West. What's your question? You're on the air.
Yes, if the client doesn't match the back-end, front-end ratio, is the bank still supposed to make the loan?
Okay, state that one more time for me.
If the client doesn't match the back-end, front-end ratio, is the bank still supposed to make the loan?
They don't match. You're talking about the financial ratio, the qualification to get the loan. Is the bank still supposed to make the loan, or are they not? Can you speak to that?
I don't know the answer to that.
Fair enough.
I don't know either.
Yep, sorry.
I think each bank has their criteria.
Yeah, I don't think there's a law against it. I mean, the lenders can lend however they want to. If they want to take that risk, then they can take the risk.
And of course, that kind of risk, and you expressed an opinion on this, that kind of risk is what got us into that situation.
Yeah.
I think that the financial system got us into this situation. And when I say financial system, I'm referring to lenders and lenders' agents and the people behind lenders. It's that system that has made possible the adjustable rate mortgages, which 8 or 9 or 10 years ago we never would have seen. They were called products. It's a contract. It's a horrible one, as many homeowners are now finding to their peril and to their detriment. That came not from the homeowner or the borrower, but from the bank as a product that they were offering in their terms. In my opinion, as a prosecutor and as an attorney of some years, the cause of the problem we now face, and that the effect we have to deal with in the district attorney's office, is at its root the financial system. And the agents of that financial system, for our purposes, or my description rather, are the banks. They are both the beginner of the problem, and they also are the source of the solution. But Jennifer mentioned a term, loss mitigation department. That's a department in almost every bank that I'm aware of to deal with mortgage modifications. If a homeowner or borrower can find and get access to that loss mitigation department, and that's a big if, they have a pretty good chance of affecting a change in their loan, if it can be done at all. However, if the borrower, in our experience, is dealing with the collection department, which is probably the source of the horror story you were describing earlier, they're not going to get that same kind of response, because that isn't the collection department's job. That's the loss mitigations department job. And do they communicate with one another? I don't think nearly as well as we would like them, or think that they should.
Now, Larry, let me throw out a challenging question to you, and that is, you work for the government in some capacity.
I do.
And part of your job may, and I don't know this, ultimately be to examine banks and institutions to see if they are culpable and subject to some kind of a redress through the attorney's office. Is that fair?
Well, it's probably true. I haven't, thank goodness, had to face that kind of a question, or that kind of a task. At the county level, we probably never would. That's probably an attorney general, for example, or an FBI or a U.S. attorney kind of question or kind of issue they'd be dealing with, not probably the local prosecutor office.
But these very banks are now, to some degree, not completely, but to some degree, owned by the government. So how does the government sue itself?
That's what lawyers and judges are and courtrooms are for. They just file the complaint. I see your point, and it's, of course, a circular argument, and it does have a certain humor to it and irony in it. I don't know the answer to that one either. I'm just a little old Cal County prosecutor. Okay, so let's take another call. Let's go out to Landers. Martin, you're on the air. It's your call. What's your question?
Yes, I'm a disabled person that had a lot of trouble getting my house refinanced, and I went through a lot of hell. Anyways, I got it, and I don't think it's right the way I got it, but I've been trying to get it remodified, and these people I call keep telling me that I qualify, but then they ask for outrageous money that I can't afford because I'm on a fixed income. I've been 30 years disabled, so I don't get much, I got back on this qualify with real low income, so I didn't get much. But I am struggling here now, trying to make ends meet. I had to drop my auto insurance to a non-full coverage and stuff. Then I had an accident right after that. Now I can get my car fixed, but that's besides the point. I would like to know if there's some way that I could get this modification, because they say a good person with that's paying. Cause I have all my stuff directly taken out of my account.
Martin, let me ask, at the first part of your call, you mentioned that you did get the modification?
No, I didn't.
So
they just say I qualify for it, but then they want me to pay a big amount that I can't afford.
I understand. And by, don't give us the name, but tell us, is it the bank directly you're dealing with, or is it some kind of entity?
No, it's these things on TV that I've been doing, and ones that call me over the telephone.
Okay, let's assume for a moment that Martin has expended a substantial amount of time and put his hopes into this entity. They've assured him that they'll be able to take care of it if only he can make that first payment that they want. Is this one of those people that is fraudulent, or will they have, in your opinion, the connections that he needs to make the modification?
Can I pop in here?
Go ahead.
I think there's one red flag that hasn't been discussed, and that is that if that company is contacting the homeowner as opposed to the homeowner contacting the company, that is an immediate red flag, I think. If this gentleman contacted this company and is not getting the resolution that he would like, I don't see the likelihood of the result being fraudulent nearly as much as if he's responding to an ad or a telemarketer. If he's being contacted, that I think is the first place you stop and you stand back and you say, wait a minute, and reevaluate what you're doing.
So from a prosecutorial standpoint, you mentioned that the district attorney's office may be 2 to 3 years behind.
Yes.
But from television standpoint, most of us believe that if any company makes a misrepresentation on television, that's yanked within days. So it must be legitimate if it's on television. Is that fair to say?
No, I wish we could yank it within days. I mean, we spend a lot of time at the Federal Trade Commission looking at television advertising and the problems and the pitfalls of these advertisements on TV. I mean, marketers are always pushing it to try to compete with each other, and somebody has to watch them, and that's us. And certainly just because it's on television does not necessarily mean it's legitimate. Absolutely not. I mean, you shouldn't believe everything you see on TV. I mean, it's so cliche, but it's true.
Okay, and Larry, I really want to highlight what you said, because in a very sincere and understated way, what you pointed out is that everybody who finds themselves behind in payments is likely to be solicited. Suddenly they will be receiving mail and calls from people that offer to help. There are plenty of people who legitimately can help, but they don't mail you letters, typically. Is that true?
I think that's typically true. In my experience, the folks that we've learned in our office have actually achieved good results for homeowners in modification efforts are lawyers and law firms and specialists in the area of modifications, and they don't need to advertise. They have plenty of work. So, as I said, I would be extremely cautious of a firm that contacted
all right,
homeowners.
So I'm going to go out to another call. Let's go to San Jacinto. See if I got that right, Renee. It's your call. What's your question?
Hi, I'm renting a house in San Jacinto. I found out, because I went to the courthouse, looked the owners up, they are in foreclosure. When they came to pick the rent up, I confronted them. Why aren't you taking my rent and put it towards the mortgage? They told me it was none of my business. Now, isn't it true that if you're collecting rent, it should go to the lender while you're trying to get a modification? They claim they're trying to get a modification. I have no proof of that. And I had a year lease, which is up. They told, well, it'll be up next month. If I try to leave now, they will sue me.
I understand. Okay, so I know this is outside of your area. Do you know anecdotally, we mentioned this a little bit earlier with another caller, what's the situation where when a home is in default and it has a tenant, what is the tenant to do?
Well, this is
Pastor?
Pastor. The tenant really needs to find out if, in fact, that property is in default, and try to find out who the owner is. I wasn't able to listen or understand all the question there, but I mean, one of the things that they need to do is maybe set up a trust account to put that money in that trust in the interim. And I wasn't sure if she mentioned that she's
Pastor,
Victor.
I'll recap for you, and it's just, in her case, she was reluctant to make the rent payment to the owner who's in default, and the owner said it's none of her business, she has to make the rent payment, or it'll be a lease break and she'll be sued.
Yeah, that's a tough call. You know?
Yep.
And she's in Sacramento, did you say?
Yeah,
No, San Jacinto.
Oh. Yeah,
My understanding is that renters are obliged in all cases to continue making their payment to whoever the owner is, and until the trustee sale, that is the property's original owner, the person to whom you have a lease contract.
And as far as who
if she hears otherwise, that's what it is.
I would say to the landlord. They're obligated
To
to
the
the
landlord.
terms of
To
the
the
lease
landlord,
to the
right.
landlord.
And as far as what the landlord does with the money, I mean, the landlord can do what he wants with the money.
Until it transfers ownership.
That's right.
The fact that they're in default or not in default is irrelevant to the tenant. Is that true?
I think that's
Pretty
true.
much, yeah. I mean, the landlord typically doesn't have any contractual obligation to just turn around and give the money to the lender. I mean, the landlord can do whatever he wants
Okay.
with the money, unfortunately.
Let's jump out to another call. Let's go to Palm Springs. Jeff, it's your turn. You're on the air. It's your call.
Hi. I have a mortgage with a very large company. And in January, they sent me notification via FedEx that I was eligible for a loan modification. And it was going to drop my mortgage payment, I would say probably about 40%. I filled out the paperwork, sent it in, and over the next 3 months or so, they said that they were reviewing it. And the representatives I spoke with told me to just make the new payment, which I did. And I'm finding out now that was probably the wrong thing to do. After about 3 months, I was notified that I was denied. But they told me that whatever reason, that I could reapply for another loan modification, which I did. I just received paperwork, an approval of this past week. They did approve the loan modification for me, but I'm currently at an adjustable at like 8.75%. I'm sure it's going to go up in the next next year or so. But it hasn't dropped my actual mortgage payment, which I can't afford. I mean, I'm on the verge of going into foreclosure as it stands with the old payment. This new modification only drops the payment about $150 a month, which isn't going to help me. My question is, what is my advantage of signing this new loan document or this new modification? My first payment would be due in September, and if I can't make that payment since the rate, the amount hasn't changed, what is the benefit? Or am I causing or creating myself more trouble by signing this new loan modification if I think I'm going to go into foreclosure with the new rate?
Good question, Jeff. And again, I know it's outside of the fraud expertise technically, but as a rule of thumb, do you have any advice for somebody that finds themselves, and we've heard this before, that some of the modification offers are superficial, that in some cases, if the amount of principal on the home is near market value, then the new modification is not going to change the mortgage payment that much. But in many cases, they were originally at the bubble rate of principal, and they were at a very higher interest rate, such as this, compared to market rate right now, and they don't make a modification substantial enough. So is that just toying with the consumer?
If the lender is contacting, and Jennifer may be able to say this better than I, but if the lender is contacting the homeowner and offering a loan modification, that's a marketing department who's busy generating fees and funds for the bank or the lender in that refinance. And the impetus there is not the protection of the borrower, but rather the generation of income for the lender. If the borrower is in genuine distress in his home loan and contacts the loan mitigation division of the lender himself, not the marketing division of trying to place a different loan, I think the chances are probably better for that borrower to get a more advantageous result from the lender than if he's dealing with a marketing department. That would be my first impression.
How would somebody know?
Again, here, this borrower is, if I understand the statement correctly, this borrower is contacted by the bank first. That tells me it's probably a marketing department.
But from the same entity that we're talking about going to the loss mitigation department, they are reaching out and just trying to generate, because if you do a loan modification, there are fees, are there not, at closing?
Usually there are closing costs.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
But whether they're going to be as substantial, there are a number of new programs, and they seem to be, the feds are coming up with one program after another, and they seem to be good for and beneficial to the homeowner. Each one seems to get a little bit better because they're addressing a problem that simply isn't going away. It just seems to be getting worse. So from that perspective, in the mitigation department, I would think that the homeowner would get a better result with fewer and lower fees.
Isn't it fair to say that a bank should not be offering somebody a modification that they know, by looking at the person's paperwork, is untenable to the person?
Doesn't seem logical. No, I mean, to answer Jeff's question, I mean, if it's not going to change your payment very much, if you're still listening, and you're going to have to pay fees to do the modification, doesn't seem like a good idea to me.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would also say that one of the things that should be done is he should probably go to a HUD certified counselor so they can review the documents to see exactly, what his payments were before, what his payments were with the first offer, and then the second offer. And very important is to review the fees that are being charged. Because it might not be really an advantage for him to really go forward with it.
Yep.
And really, you should. I mean, one of the basic things that we do here when we're looking at any claim, we need to see all the documents, because without them, you really cannot make a good assessment.
Okay, I'm going to jump out to another caller. Cathedral City, I'm going to say it's John, but it might be Jean. So it's your call. What's your question?
Yes, it's Jean. I was wondering what you thought of reverse mortgage.
Great question. We've heard a lot about that. Can you explain what they are, or can you tell us? A lot of people fear it, like it has a taint of fraud or at least ill-advised.
We do have some information on the Federal Trade Commission's website about reverse mortgages. I'm sort of generally familiar with them. I haven't had to deal with them specifically in any of my cases, but certainly if you're able to go to our website, which is ftc.gov, there is a section, we have a consumer information section that has information specifically about reverse mortgages. And I think that my general impression is that consumers should use caution with these products, that they can provide a benefit because it's sort of like an annuity. I think you get a payment. The way it's reversed is the bank pays you. You give them an interest in your home, a certain amount of equity in your home, and then they make a monthly payment to you, and eventually it gets paid off. I mean, the problem is if you run out of money or if you need a lump sum and it's tied up in this product, then that could be a problem. If you need to sell your home later,
or if the equity goes down.
Exactly, or if the equity goes down.
But is it? Go ahead.
Or I've seen another trap in a reverse mortgage in some instances, and I don't think it's necessarily fraudulent, but I think it's unanticipated by the home borrower, and that is where a husband and wife, for example, elderly always, the wife, for example, can't qualify, but the husband can, and the lender, in order to place the reverse mortgage, requires that the wife be taken off the property and the note only in the name of the husband. Then the husband later puts the wife back on the property because he wants her to have the property should something happen to him. The problem with that is the bank has the right to call the note when something does, if he passes. And the result that the couple were looking for, that is to protect the wife, is gone. It's zero. The house now belongs to the bank, or not if the wife can come up with this huge payment, and that is unanticipated and then becomes a trap. And folks who are going to do that need to be very careful about the term and fully understand what they're getting into. It may be a very good deal for some people.
On the other hand, is it fair to say that some reverse mortgages are probably legitimate and properly used, are perfectly fine to indulge in? Or are you saying that all of them warrant enough caution that you should, as a rule of thumb, avoid them?
I don't think I'd go that far.
No, I wouldn't either.
No, I think they can be useful.
Yes, and I would agree. I think they are a useful estate planning tool in the right hands. I think if a couple is going to do that, they need to get some sound advice about and really understand the implications of the decision they're going to make.
And I would agree with Jennifer and Larry on this. You just need to use extreme caution because there are hefty fees and commission attached to these reverse mortgages. And many times, if an elderly couple is facing a financial situation because of a health situation, unforeseen emergencies that they had to pay out extreme amounts of money, sometimes they need to talk this over with their heirs or their family members, because maybe they can help them out instead of really getting this reverse mortgage, because there may be other options available to them.
Okay, and about 30 seconds, tell me what advisor should somebody turn to get advice on that kind of a loan?
Oh, an estate planning lawyer.
Estate planning lawyer. Okay.
Absolutely.
That's what you're looking for.
I think so. I would have to agree. Well, they could start with our website, which has some general information about products, and then if they're intent on going that route, certainly getting professional help.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I want to let our viewers know that When you go to kvcr.org, you click on Facing the Mortgage Crisis, which is prominently displayed on the homepage. You will be in a site where we will collect all the information that we can from all of our advisors. There's a lot there already specific to the Inland Empire, including how to avoid some fraud. And Pastor, a lot of the information that you've made available is there as well. So I want to thank our guests, Jennifer Brennan, Larry Roberts, and on the phone, Pastor Herrera. And thank you, the viewers, for tuning in. Join us next week when the experts will be here again to answer your questions about the mortgage crisis. I'm Roger Bowman, and remember, it's your call.
For more information about this project and related topics, visit kvcr.org and click on Facing the Mortgage Crisis.